What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to my channel for more great stories. And today we are going to talk about real Mafia Code that if you break it, you are gone. Now, this is not like videos I have done in the past where I just tell you what the Code of Silence is or what the Omerta is. No, we actually gone not get into a story where a guy was killed because he broke the Mafia Code. And you will see why he was killed for doing what he did. Now, before we get started, don't forget to hit the like button. Subscribe, turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. And let's begin. On October 23, 1978, a man named Joseph Barbera left his home in Niagara to go to work. Joseph worked as a truck driver, and when he arrived to the workplace, everything was fine. He worked the day shift and went home at around 4 p.m. Once he got home, he had dinner with his family and then went out with some friends to a local bar to watch some football. The Buffalo Bills were playing the Miami Dolphins. So Joe got home late and went straight to bed. He had to wake up early again to go to work. The next day was the same routine until around 4 p.m. when Joe finished work. But that night he didn't go to the bar. Instead, he decided to stay home. Now, at first he watched TV with his wife, but she eventually fell asleep. So Joe poured himself another beer, and he kept watching TV. At around 10:30 p.m., there was a knock on the door. Joe opened it and saw 3 men standing there. They asked him if he was Joseph Barbero, and he said yes. Then they told him they wanted to ask him a few questions regarding an accident that happened that evening. Apparently one of the men had been in an accident, and they wanted to know if Joe knew anything about it. Joe thought for a second and said, "I think I might have seen what you're talking about. I saw it from my bedroom window." The men thanked him and asked if they could come inside and look around. Now at this point, Joe should have said no and closed the door. But he wasn't thinking straight, and he agreed. To let them in, once they entered the house, Joe led them to the living room and sat them down. But instead of asking any questions, one of the men pulled out a gun and shot Joe several times. The other 2 men were helping the injured man who had been in the accident earlier. They put him in Joe's car and drove him to the hospital. In the morning, Joe's wife came downstairs and found him dead in the living room. She immediately called the police and reported the murder. As for the men, they were able to give the police a description of Joe's car, which led to a chase. During the chase, the men crashed the car and then ran away. Police found the injured man inside the vehicle and took him off to the hospital. His name was Dominic Brucarelli, and he survived. When he was released from the hospital, he was arrested and charged with attempted murder. As for the other 2 men, they were never caught, and the investigation eventually went cold. However, after a couple of months, Dominic testified against the other 2 men who were finally arrested. Now, if you are wondering how Joe broke the Mafia Code, it was right here when he said, "I think I might have seen what you're talking about. I saw it from my bedroom window." In reality, he really didn't see anything, but he was trying to be a good citizen and help the men out. Unfortunately for him, he should have just closed the door and called the cops himself. But by saying what he said, he implicated himself. The Mafia Code says that if you break the Code of Silence, you are gone. And that is exactly what happened to poor Joe. You see, the 3 men weren't gangsters. They were undercover cops who had been following Dominic. They had arrested him in connection with a series of robberies. They needed a place to hide Dominic. While he recovered from his injuries, that is when they went to Joe's house. You see, Joe's house had been used as a meeting place for mobsters in the area. Therefore, the cops figured he would be willing to help them out. Little did they know that Joe was actually a member of the local mafia crew. When he answered the door and saw the 3 strange men, he should have known something was up. And when they asked him to come over and take a look at the accident, he should have refused. By saying what he said, he pretty much let them know he was willing to cooperate. And in the mafia, being cooperative with the cops is grounds for immediate termination. You see, in the mafia, members are not allowed to talk to the cops. If they do, they are kicked out of the organization, and if they refuse to leave the organization, they are killed. Why? Because members of the mafia are expected to be loyal to the organization above all else. If they start cooperating with the cops, the whole organization will fall apart. Secrets and lies are what keep the mafia together. If they don't keep secrets, the cops will know their every move, and the organization will be crippled. Not to mention, members of the mafia live by a different moral code than us normal people. They believe it is okay to kill someone if they are an enemy of the state. In fact, it is encouraged. That is why when Joe said he saw the accident, the men instantly knew he was a snitch. So they went inside his house to make an example out of him. Joe was a made man in the Bono crime family. This means he was a full-fledged member and not just an associate. He joined the Mafia in the early 1960s and became a capo in the 1970s. He was also a successful businessman who owned several bars and restaurants. That is why when he was killed, the other members of his crew were furious. They demanded the police find the men responsible for his death. But the cops told them they would have to wait until Dominic recovered from his injuries and was able to testify. However, the Mafia didn't want to wait. They wanted revenge immediately. That is when they decided to kidnap the chief of detectives. You see, the police were close to breaking the backbones of several Mafia families. And if they didn't do something to stop it, the entire Mafia would collapse. On January 1979, a judge approved a wiretap on Dominic's phone. Several conversations between Dominic and other mafiosos were intercepted. One of the conversations was between Dominic and Anthony Fatico, the acting boss of the Bono crime family. During the conversation, Dominic admitted to killing Joe and explained why. He said he had no choice because Joe was a snitch. Now, even though the police had enough evidence to arrest Anthony, they didn't. They continued to listen in on Dominic's conversations, and eventually they heard a conversation between Dominic and another mafioso saying that Anthony ordered a hit on Dominic. It turns out that Anthony wanted Dominic dead because he was afraid he would testify against him. Finally, the police decided to arrest Anthony. On February 1979, over 100 police officers raided Anthony's house and arrested him. He was charged with murder, racketeering, and drug trafficking. Now, you are probably wondering what happened to Dominic. Well, he had already disappeared by the time Anthony was arrested. Turns out Dominic received word that Anthony was going to have him whacked, so he skipped bail and disappeared. The police never found him, and the charges against him were eventually dropped. So what happened to poor Joe? Well, he was buried in a cemetery in Niagara. His grave is still there to this day. If you want to hear more stories about the Mafia, stay tuned. And as always, I'll see you in the next video.